Previously, in Hedge Knights, Megahoof brought back a slab of the Salix tree to his laboratory for study. The Glade members finished harvesting this year's crop and stored it for winter. Sapo brewed a giant batch of tea. The masons made more progress on the main gate's construction, and a chain of maddened lynx attacked the keep. Episode 14, Ironclad. The members of the Bison Glade work to clean up the mess after being attacked by lynx. Judea noticed that one of the lynx seemed to be suffering and not dead yet, and decided to euthanize it. Sapo realized that soon they would have an abundance of meat again, and asked Judea if it would be possible for her to set up a meat rack near the windmill. Megahoof told Judea that the Salix tree was so fundamentally different from any of the other trees the Adlets had ever encountered that many of his assumptions about it had to be reassessed. Unfortunately, this set his progress back a fair bit, and he told her he'd not likely finish as soon as he had thought or hoped. Madzi had asked if she'd be permitted to do more meaningful work besides scrubbing pollution and stocking shelves. Lazarus told her that of course she could, but she'd have to make one very important promise first. She listened keenly, and he said that if there was ever a hint of danger, she'd drop what she was doing and run straight back into the keep with no hesitation. She agreed, so he let the others know that she was ready to work making bricks and timber. Tangier told Lazarus it was time for him to forge himself a new set of armor. After a season and a half of repelling bloodthirsty visitors, his armor was visibly dented and worn. She knew in order to offer him the materials for a new set of armor, she'd be stuck mining the iron under the keep. But for her, it was simply just a labor of love. Lazarus made sure that Tangier truly understood the scope of her offer, pointing out how much iron was needed for each and every piece he donned. And once she reaffirmed she understood, he also said he'd melt down as much of their old iron pieces as he could to make it easier on her too. The ever-expanding herd of bison consumed a mind-boggling amount of nutrifungus. Back on the coast, the bison mostly grazed thin cover crop and were malnourished and sluggish as a result. The squires had no idea their herd would expand so rapidly when the bison were properly fed and shielded from pollution. Their success as bison breeders came at a steep cost. The bounty of nutrifungus dwindled, and Sapo realized he needed to thresh the wheat by hand in order to retain as much of the hay as possible. He'd asked the others what they thought about converting some of the farm section back to fungus as well, like they had done the winter previous. The glowing embers from the hearths and ovens flickered through the vaulted windows and arrow loops. The keep stood proudly against the nightshade horizon as a bold edifice resisting against waves of invasion. Despite the amount of blood shed within its halls, the keep emanated a welcoming warmth like a beacon in the dark to refugees and wanderers alike. Madzi had watched the adults of the Glade cut stone and wood for an entire season with sharpened curiosity. She was excited to be crafting alongside the adults and hoped that one day she could take up weaponsmithing. She wanted to learn, but knew Lazarus didn't have the time to teach her. but if she worked really hard to make timber and stone, maybe it would free up time for the adults to help her learn things she wanted to. At the very least, she was happy not to be cleaning pollution. A slight frost thawed from the ripthorn as day broke. A thick fog swept through the glade, blanketing the keep and adlets alike. The reduced visibility meant that they'd have to be extra vigilant. Visitors seemingly attacked at random, not purposely using the cover of darkness or fog, but being guarded and vigilant has kept the squires alive, so it was a habit worth keeping. Lazarus shoveled coals into the forge and fetched some of the best-looking ingots from the shelves. He was taking up on Tangier's offer to supply him with iron for a new set of armor. The armor passed down to him wasn't designed for combat against visitors. Due to the prolonged centuries of peace amongst the Adlet kingdoms, most armor was ceremonial, and what little armor was functional wasn't designed to defend against visitors. The armor he was using was sufficient, but not ideal, so now was his chance to make the best gear possible to repel the visitors from the keep. There was also the possibility of smelting some of the older gear and using it so that Tangier wouldn't have to spend all day and night in the mines. Dave worked through his exposure sickness. He didn't enjoy being sequestered in the keep and decided to work as long as he could in the milder autumn temperatures, rather than to rest indoors only to get back to masonry in the bone-chilling winter wind. As long as Sapo or Judea didn't force him to rest, he'd work as much as he could outdoors in the sun. Megahoof decided to go for a walk after having spent so much time studying the Salix tree. He was feeling anxious and stressed due to how vital his task was for the long-term success of the keep and his community. He decided to help out by collecting wood from Lazarus and Sapo's fallings, and marveled at the completed curtain wall. The gatehouses looked menacing from the outside, a perfect way to greet unwanted visitors. Long-term exposure to pollution and terrible food commonly turned the creatures around the glade ravenous and mad. Lynx, rats, even giant white bears, the Adlets had seen it all. Someday they had hoped to clean far beyond their own keep for the benefit of all of the critters in the forest, but today they had to kill a rat instead. Megahoof made a note that the griffinberry trees started to get some fruit buds. He didn't know how well the berries would fare in the deep freeze of the winter, but the griffinberry trees were once pretty common in the Cortraro forest, so he suspected they'd be fine. If he told his friends back home he nurtured a garden of griffinberry trees with giant patches of ambrosia bushes, nobody would believe him. Both were fruit of myth and lore, and yet commonplace now in the Glade. The Adlets were very happy to have oven-baked bread to eat. Spending another winter eating slimy fungus may have broken their will, and worse would be resorting to hunting the poor critters of the Glade. Orelko secretly wished they would have to resort to hunting, but fortunately wild creatures regularly attacked the keep, so he could satiate his need for hunting, all in the name of the defense of the keep. Dave knew he needed a rest from the pollution. His mind was bleary and his vision dimmed. Coughing and vomiting would follow if he didn't take better care of himself. He'd look for ways to productively busy himself to keep from going stir-crazy while sequestered in the keep. Lazarus finished smithing a combat armet and immediately put it on to show Tangier the fruits of her labor. It was finely crafted, angled to more easily deflect the blades of attackers, and covered his neck and shoulders better than his sallet helmet ever could. It was designed to be paired with a full plate of armor, but he hadn't the materials for such an undertaking just yet. Lazarus then took his old helmet and melted it down into ingots to help alleviate the demand on Tangier's time for mining. While his old helmet held sentimental value, he valued Tangier's time more. He then grabbed some of the discarded longswords and melted them down as well. Lazarus had an idea for Tangier and the other squires to consider. Surface iron was far easier to mine than iron down in the mine shaft, and Tangier would be able to mine ample surface iron if she went exploring. She just didn't want to be out in the mountains alone. In hindsight, nobody should be sent out alone, and Megahoof took some serious risks when he went for the Salix slab. If he could convince another member of the Glade to wear armor for the defense of the gates, he could escort Tangier to iron outcroppings near the Glade. He then came to realize Tangier would not likely want them both to leave Shellbell behind, and wilderness was certainly no place for a child. Tangier would likely only agree if Lazarus stayed behind to guard their child, so he'd have to ask someone else to help guard Tangier. Perhaps Sappo would do it. But if Sappo went, he'd need to cook a giant feast prior to leaving so everyone would have enough food in his absence. Perhaps relying on the Mackie rations would be reasonable, especially considering the Adlets had so many. These were considerations for others to weigh. He'd propose the excursion soon. With winter on the horizon, it was time to convert some of the southern field back to Nutrifungus. The bison were increasingly difficult to feed, so the fungus would mostly be for their needs and not for the adlets, thankfully. Dave asked if he could help renovate the bison's pen. He wanted a task to work on, but because he had been exposed to so much pollution, he couldn't venture out. Everyone welcomed him to help improve the keep as he saw fit, so he started to brainstorm improvements he could make within the walls of the keep. Lazarus stayed up late hammering out steel for new gauntlets. He found making gauntlets particularly tedious. Working with small pieces of metal felt more like a jeweler's work than an armorsmith. The tedium frustrated him enough that he knew he'd not be able to sleep until the work was completed. His old gauntlets were starting to rust from all the farming he did while wearing them. So once he'd finished, he'd make sure to oil the metal so he'd not have to make any more of them anytime soon. After smithing a very fine set of gauntlets, Lazarus felt invigorated and decided to melt down as much iron as he could so he could get started on his next piece. Dave wanted to make it easier to traverse the farm and fields of the keep. His idea was a simple one: build a pathway to the mineshaft and then enclose the fields for nutrifungus. Moving quickly within the keep walls was often vitally important for defense, to make sure doors were closed and walls were repaired in case of raids, so any improvements to pathing and walkways would likely be highly welcomed by the other adlets. Dave also volunteered to help convert the farm fields over to nutrifungus. It would give him something to do while he recovered. Judea was happy not to be responsible for the fields and also the main gate, especially given that Tangier was unavailable to help due to mining. The Masons hit a major milestone. The entirety of the gate and curtain walls had been constructed. The overlapping merlons gave way to an entryway beset with cavalry spikes and 2 deep limestone trenches. Invaders wouldn't be able to seek cover from the dozens of arrow loops that overlooked the entryway. Multiple gates adorned the gatehouse to negate a single point of vulnerability. The doors were designed to allow for either a single guard to repel invaders or even up to 3 men-at-arms. There were additional features needed, but at least the structure was completed. This was a very fine accomplishment for the Glade members. The pantry shelves no longer stored nutrifungus. The adlets needed to expand their heated nutrifungal farms soon. Dave jumped at the task to roof up the new section. He had learned so much about construction, masonry, and carpentry under the tutelage of Judea and sometimes Tangier. He didn't realize he had a passion for the craft, having spent his formative years preparing for mercenary life. He still yearned for the adrenaline rush that mercenary life provided, but between swarms of visitors and crazed creatures of the Glade, there was plenty of death-defying to be done within these walls too. The farm was nearly ready. All that remained was to ensure the Nutrifungus stayed warm throughout the winter. The Adlets were fortunate that Tangier had mined such an abundance of coal the previous year. Tangier picked a name for the youngest calf in the pen. She had taken a liking to the calf who would always look up and grunt as she passed by. Moxie, because she envied the calf's pep and energy, and the calf reminded her to greet the day head on. Megahoof had many great insights about the Salix tree. Its biology was more closely related to the tea they'd sowed into polluted ground rather than any of the ancient seeds he had recovered from the botany lab. Megahoof speculated that the Salix absorbed pollution from the soils because it treated the pollution as a sort of strange fertilizer, able to break down the pollution into its constituent parts and use it for its own growth. The filtration of the soil was just a beneficial side effect from the tree, but one that Megahoof and the others wanted to exploit for their own benefit. Megahoof had a little more research left on his plate, but it was nearly time to plan the next step to harness the power of the Salix. The sky opened up and unleashed a deluge of snow, a rare occurrence in the Glade. Judea rallied the other Adlets to celebrate their collective successes and also celebrate the snowstorm. Snow in the Glade helped to hide all the polluted blemishes, and the Adlets collected snow and rain in barrels for brewing, drinking, and cooking as well. The party was modest, but the Adlets were together, warmed by company and hearths. Sapo joked that he bet everyone wanted some pumpkin fritters, but at least he had brewed up a huge batch of tea and kept the ale and beer flowing as well. Lazarus shared his thoughts about a mining excursion, and Dave chimed in that he yearned to explore and adventure. Megahoof added the next stage of his research would be to try to find Salix trees in other glades and relocate them to their own, and asked if Sapo would be able to handle the uprooting of a Salix tree with the help of Dave, Tangier, and many adult bison. The group agreed. The members were ready to embark on a new adventure. Thank you for tuning in to Hedge Knights. If you would like to support me as a content creator, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this with your friends. If you would like to become one of my Patreon patrons, a link can be found in the description of the video. If you would like to join my gaming community, A link to Discord can be found there as well. Thank you so very much for watching. A special thank you to my Patreon patrons, Twitch subscribers, and viewers like you that support the channel and made it all the way to the credits. Thank you. Hope to catch you next episode. Farewell.